have two superlative poets who will read their poetry for us. The first one is Jim Moore and then James Cushing. Jim Moore is a conscious poet of what goes on in his inner and outer life, how external events affect him. His poems have depth and yet are spare. He is a poet of conscience and of compassion. In his own words, in a variation on a poem by Tagore, I wrote, quote, "I live now by the light death casts." Jim Moore lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota with his wife, the photographer Joanne Verberg. He has been writing poetry for about 50 years. His next book will be published by Grey Wolf Press in fall 2021. It is tentatively titled Prognosis. A brilliant poet is Jim Moore.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry. Thank you for clapping, James. I appreciate that. And Jennifer. I'm really happy to be here for lots of different reasons. Probably really the most important is because, Harry, of my connection with you and Holly Prado, and you both represent for me a time in my life as a poet when I was really getting started, and you were examples. We were contemporaries, but at the same time, examples of what really mattered to me in poetry. So thank you for asking me to be here. And I'm going to read a variety of different kinds of poems. I'm going to start with a very short poem, and then read something slightly longer. This is a poem that I wrote. It's called Secrets, and I wrote it actually when I was in graduate school. I've been writing about my mother since I actually began writing. This is called Secrets. It's a prose poem, a little prose poem. I'm going to try to look up. I was told the last time I did a reading on Zoom that I kept going down like that. So attractive as my bald head is, I'm still going to try to look up Secrets for my mother on her birthday. Somewhere at this very moment, someone is eating peanut butter right out of the jar. He is alone and the television is off. His mother has no idea what he's doing. It is his secret. Very far away, a dog barks, a horn honks. The day his grandmother died, he had a crazy desire to laugh, and yet was very sad. You don't tell your mother your secrets for fear she won't love you. Well, I think in a way, my poetry has been, since the very beginning, an attempt to, first of all, understand the secrets or see them, and then to tell them in some way that might be of value to others as well as to myself. Well, the next poem I'm going to read is really a very different kind of poem. It's a longish. I don't want to use the word long because I don't want anybody to walk away from their screens. It's a poem called For You. Back in 1970, I was in prison for 10 months as a resistor to the draft. And my thought was perhaps some of you watching this reading will remember that period probably quite well. And it's a poem about how I came to end up going to prison. It's called For You. I know it sounds too much like poetry, but it was dusk that made me a felon. A winter evening in Moline, Illinois. The next day I quoted Whitman to my draft ward. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul. And sent my draft card back to them. I can still feel the cold metal on the mailbox. See the park with its oaks, the black winter sky, so close, so distant, as I dropped the letter inside and turned quickly away. For 2 years, I'd argued the war, drinking instant coffee with a man who wore the same blue velour shirt so often, it's all I remember of him now. We took turns arguing one way, then another about what to do. We sat in the basement kitchen of a boarding house. Sometimes we yelled, sometimes we sat silently, our hands around our mugs of coffee, our hearts confused. I lived alone in Moline, Illinois, one dusty and dimly lit flight above a greeting card shop run by a likable, red-faced John Bircher. It was the first year I got paid for teaching, paid for being excited about what I believed in, for having opinions I couldn't give away to my friend in the velour shirt. Then 2 students quit school and within months were dead in Vietnam. A working class college, our basement classroom was in an old Pentecostal church. The mix of Sunday school and poverty was too much on Monday mornings. The students almost asleep, sprawled on the freshly waxed floor, huddled near their classrooms like refugees waiting for their morning soup. I was the razzle-dazzle guy from the Big U in Iowa City. I didn't own a tie. I lived in a VW bus all fall. I had opinions that gave off the glitter of newly minted funny money. To the students, I was a classy eccentric, and I had them with me from the first, those future postal clerks and nurses, mechanics, and would-be writers with their mixed bag of Sartre and letter jackets, hickeys and acid, and finally, of life and death. The second student who died had sat in the back of the room, chair tilted against the wall, his long hair spread out behind him like a scraggly fan. He often brought his guitar to class in a black case and wrote his poems on cheap yellow paper. He wanted to know about mileage from my bus. These were the only details I remembered when his girlfriend told me he'd been killed. It was winter by then, and I was living alone above the greeting card shop. After that second student's death, I spent the weekend by myself. I was reading Suzuki at the time and wanted to believe in something, even if it was only the pull and release of my own breath, as I sat cross-legged, meditating best I knew how. I liked Zen. For some reason, for someone raised an Anglican, it seemed the closest thing to all that upper-class tastefulness, so lovely, so earnest in its own careful way. While I sat meditating, I felt even lonelier. All my enthusiasm in the classroom, my voluble and spontaneous love of poetry that fit itself so nicely into the 50-minute hour, my a la mode hiking boots. I thought of that dead boy with his guitar and his questions and the careful but wasted economy of his cheap yellow paper. And I felt sick to my soul for all my talk of Thoreau and Whitman. I wanted to be a citizen again, to pledge allegiance to something with the faith I'd felt in 4th grade, facing the flag behind Miss Rogers' desk. It was my country too, not just a John Bircher downstairs with his saccharine greeting cards and his private gun collection. Towards the evening of the second day, I'd had enough of the hush, pause, hush of my own breath and the shooting pain of ankles and knees. I wanted out and away from those motionless dust balls. It felt wonderful to walk into evening alone in Moline, Illinois, in the middle of America, the weightless center of a centerless country. I walked and I looked. I saw some men sitting at a bar. I stood outside staring through the small pane of glass at the top of the door. Everything moved so slowly, my breath still deep and even, holding me rooted in the evening air like an anchor when men fish from a boat and seem to drift, but are only rocking back and forth between one known place and another. I saw the men, heads bent toward the neon light of a beer sign behind the bar, a man with a lasso in one hand and beer in another. The lasso was red, the beer golden. A bartender stood beside the sign, white apron, holding a pencil. I watched as he gestured towards the bent heads of the men sitting before him. One of them nodded up and down, and that simple, barely noticeable sign of agreement brought tears to my eyes and an assent of my own, where I stood anchored by my own steady breath. I walked on, went up the hill that rose steeply away from the river near where I lived. A sled had been left out for the night on the front yard's thin crust of snow. I saw this ordinary sight, framed in a deepening gray, like a letter in a phrase, still undeciphered, but so important that once I understood it, it would change the meaning of all other words. As I walked slowly up the hill, other objects I saw seemed part of the same phrase: a porch swing drawn up in its 2 chairs, waiting near the roof for spring, a car with a broken windshield glittering under a streetlight. For you, I found myself saying over and over as I neared the top of the hill. My breath came in short gasps. Now, for you, for you. It became a kind of greed. I couldn't get enough of the men with their bent heads in the bar, the sled, the swing. They gave and I took. I wanted it to go on forever. This greed for the world. I knew that it was for the sake of a sled left behind in the moment of impatience for dinner that I would go to prison. Not just for political reasons, not even for moral ones, not for reasons at all, or not the kind I could explain to a draft board. For you, sled, for you, bent heads, for you, for you. If in a moment of peace the world could yield up such signs, then I wanted an inner peace, both permanent and casual. But I could not begin until I settled with the war. It was that dusk, that walk, that sled that convinced me their world could sustain me if only I could abandon my soul searching and endless arguments over what to do, like a character in a Chekhov story, so busy talking outside on a cold winter's night, he almost dies of frostbite while trying to prove the existence of God. If it meant going to prison, so be it. There too, there would be ordinary sights that would sustain me, or so I told myself in that moment when I believed so deeply in the strangely calming power that came from seeing clearly into the heart of everyday life. I stood at the top of the hill, alone, surrounded by what I loved. I looked down towards the Mississippi, black, except for a bridge curved through the night, and I did not know what the future would bring, or what it was inside me that would not let go of my two new words, for you. So this poem was written about 1970, but I wrote it about almost 2 decades after that, and it still seems more relevant than I would like it to be. Well, moving on. I'm really jumping around here, but why not? For many years, my wife and I had a dog that we loved unreasonably, and I wrote many horrible poems about owning a dog, but this is one that I like, teaching the dog not to nip. Do you think it's easy not biting the one you love? Try loving someone so much your mouth is only at home in the place where your teeth meet the flesh of your beloved. Try not tasting the flesh, not taking in your mouth the beloved, not going all the way. Well, speaking of Chekhov, as I was in that other poem, this is a poem called Happiness. I'm very conscious of my audience, that you're all people who have been involved in one way or another with theater, with movies, with whatever aspect of production. And this is a poem about watching Uncle Vanya, prose poem, Happiness. Uncle Vanya was sad last night, so bitter, bewildered, and trapped, just like every other time I've seen him. In 200 years, he said, perhaps they will have discovered how to be happy. Well, it didn't take that long. We know now that happiness is sitting in darkened theaters and watching failed worlds beautifully acted. The love affairs that turn ridiculous, and the drunken, impoverished dreams, the wistful hopes, and the fleeting moments of grace. What happiness to go back again into the staged, rainy night, the lightning, the sound of the revolver, back to the dark and passionate purposes of love, the birch forest, the relief of experiencing a dreariness suffered through by someone else. Then left, when we walk out after the play is finished, into the cold fall air. What happiness to know that all our mistakes have been made before, have been made over and over on one stage or another for at least 125 years. And then too, the small moments of tenderness, whether acknowledged or not on stage, we in the audience saw them. those dear, familiar bald heads of the men, the hair turning white on the women, and the same pointless jokes, and the hearts, the same broken hearts, all that love and all that loneliness. Let the thunder begin. Let the curtain rise. Okay, again, keeping in mind my audience, I want to read another poem. I have a lot of friends who are actors, and I think it's kind of a contest between actors and poets, which of us are the most, what would the word be? Nervous, anxious, neurotic, I don't know. But anyway, I love hearing their stories about forgetting lines and so on. Anyway, this is a little poem that I wrote with a friend in mind. The poem is called The Tempest, Act 2, Scene 2 ends. Act 2, Scene 2 ends. After Lead the Way, the stage door opens onto coolness. Actors stand outside between scenes, smoking. Their faces are bruised with makeup, like plums newly ripened on a tree, the true sweetness showing through. This is a poem that comes out of aging. True enough, I have forgotten many things, but I do remember the bank of clover along the freeway we were passing 30 years ago, when someone I loved made clear to me it was over. I finished with a few new poems. I've been writing a lot during the pandemic, about the pandemic, and it's a strange thought at the age of 77 to think that this reality, the pandemic, may well be the reality, my last reality, the last world that I live in. And strangely, it's actually given me a lot of energy to try to write about this sort of horrific, impossible, strange, consuming time. So this is a poem called Cheese, Almonds, Eggs. He'd been sick only 5 days, our friend. It turned out later, maybe it was the virus, maybe a heart attack. No one will ever know. An autopsy was refused him. Now he is ash. Soon the grocery store will open. Because I am old, I will go in first. Cheese, almonds, eggs, if they have them. I can't think any further than that. Yesterday, I heard the first red-winged blackbird. We were on the bridge, where they come every year, to the tall weeds by the river. A small, invisible wind that doesn't know what to do with itself, like a child lost somewhere near home, but too far away for him to see how to make his way back. If you tell me to try to rest, I will say, I am trying to find the words to say how it feels to be that child. I know no other way to rest. By the light of two underlying conditions. It helps if you are 76 to feel shorn as an animal might feel shorn, unburdened of its too muchness. It helps if you carry with you, like two candles to light the way, two underlying conditions by which to see day passing into darkness. And it helps to listen to Beethoven's late sonatas, how he shows us the way to sink into the suffering, then rise into joy, as if we are merely the keys and the music beyond our understanding plays us as it will. It helps to remember that screened-in porch not far from the ocean. It's a summer night, and I am the small boy in the hammock, swaying back and forth, barely awake. One of my grown-ups carries me inside after I have fallen asleep. In the morning, it helps to wake to the sound of the waves, not quite knowing where I am or why I am there. To what now do I truly belong? Shall I call them suffering and joy, my two underlying conditions? I'm going to read two more poems. The first one is called The Pandemic Halo. The pandemic halo began to appear a few weeks into it. Oddly, the first time, it was surrounding the head of an old lab. He was being walked, as usual, at 7 a.m. by his young owner. Lots of lamppost stops, and there it was, faint at first, then hovering at a tilt above the silky ears. I thought maybe it was a weird trick of light. The day was bright. But then the next morning, it was still there. That same day, the nurse, who wears a pink cape and parks in the lot across from me, almost always empty now, was trotting along on her way to the clinic that is just below my window. She had it too. I don't think she noticed it at all. She was walking quickly, a little late to work, so I think that was what was on her mind, not holiness. The third day, a young man in a red cap with a backpack slouched past. I'd never seen him before. You could see he was seriously depressed, looking down at the sidewalk. But there it was, firmly in place, above him, of course, so unfortunately he couldn't see how beautiful he really was. And that woman with the nasty little dog, same thing. By now the pandemic halo is well recorded. Everyone knows about it. We almost take it for granted, what had once seemed amazing. Somehow it is related to breath. When we die, it goes away. After the pandemic is over, they say the halo effect will disappear. They say we will return to life as usual. We won't need it, they say. I have my doubts. I think we might need it more than ever. I think we might be saying things like, remember how amazing it was during the pandemic? How everyone had a halo? How grief and holiness were all we knew of the world? And the sight of a dog at a lamppost could bring us to tears. So I want to finish with a short poem. It's called Even in These Times, and thank you all for looking, listening, and I look forward to hearing James read. Even in these times, a man in work clothes checks the meter outside the parking lot. Sunlight makes a run for it at 5:45 a.m. and escapes darkness. A young man wears a cap backwards and walks a dog. Even in these times, the dog is delighted to see his old friend, the lamppost. Even now, inspiration, more often than not, leads nowhere. I continue to not believe in joy, but it believes in me and arrives right on time, all dressed in black, as if for a funeral, perched on the wings of a crow, covered in sunlight. Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jim. I love those poems, and in particular, I love that pandemic halo poem.
Thank you. I do too.
I like your evenness too when you're dealing with it. You know, your voice and who you are just perfect. We have a couple minutes before I introduce James Cushing. Could you just take a couple minutes and just say why you got into poetry? What is it about poetry that attracted you in the beginning?
You know, I can answer that question. I came to poetry later than a lot of people do. I was in college at the time. I'd fallen in love with my roommate's girlfriend. I'd left that college, gone someplace else. I felt very lonely, disoriented. And one day I went into a bookstore. I loved reading and loved bookstores. This was down in Norman, Oklahoma. And I just picked up a book at random. It was a book by the poet Kenneth Rex Roth, who, of course, you'll know, but a lot of younger people wouldn't necessarily know. I've been dead a long time. But in this book, he wrote, it was a book of poems about going through exactly what I'd been going through, falling in love with the wrong person at the wrong time, all that heartache. But he did it in a way that, it became a lens for understanding life in a much larger and more generous sense than I'd been able to do. And I just was amazed. I sat on the floor of that bookstore, read the book all the way through, bought the book, and from then on, I really wanted to try to find a way to enter the world that he'd entered, this world where your experiences and the things that happened to you, whether positive or negative, that you could make something of them that went beyond what you thought you'd understood that they were. It was like meeting your father for the first time or something. This guy who seemed tremendously wise to me and yet was willing to write about heartbreak and such. So that was really the start. My grandmother had been a novelist. She wrote one novel towards the end of her life. I was a kid, and I was fascinated by that. So that was something else. I always thought, well, being a writer, it's great. You get to spend all your time by yourself, which appealed to me. Then you come down out of your bedroom after a year or so, and you published a book, and it's a big bestseller, and you get to have a party, and then you get to go back to the bedroom again and start all over. That sounded like a really good life to me. So that was definitely an influence as well. My dad was a journalist for a while. He never finished college, but he was an excellent writer, and I was curious about the world. And so, all those kinds of things.
How old were you, the poetry entrance?
When poetry?
Yeah.
I would have been like a junior in college, so whatever that makes you, like 21 or something like that. I'd read some poetry, and like in high school, I remember sitting in the English class and holding on my lap surreptitiously a book called Coney Island of the Mind by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, which I thought, this is incredible. I didn't know you could do. First of all, I didn't really understand you could be alive and writing poetry. I kind of had thought all poets were dead. I really did think that they, but here was this guy writing these poems that were just. It never occurred to me I could write them myself, but I really loved reading them. So that was one of my earliest, falling in love with a poet experiences. That was high school.
I love Coney Island number 5. Thank you for your wonderful reading. And this is the first time we've ever met on Zoom.
I know.
We're not the boomers, we're the elderly Zoomers.
The Zoomers. I know. It's so nice of you to ask me to do this, Harry. I feel honored to have been asked. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. James Cushing is our next poet. Jim, may I ask you just to, okay.
Yeah, Jim.
Your whole head is in the picture there. James Cushing, born in 1953 in Palo Alto, California, holds a doctorate in English from UC Irvine. In the early 1980s, he hosted a live poetry radio program on KPFK FM in LA, which gave early exposure to Dennis Cooper, David Trinidad, Amy Gersler, Wanda Coleman, Leland Hickman, Scott Weinberg, and many others. From 1989 until his retirement in 2020, he taught literature and creative writing at Cal Poly, SLO. He served as a Communities Poet Laureate for 2008 to 2010. Cushing poems have appeared in many journals, and his 30-year association with Cahuenga Press has resulted in 6 full-length collections of poetry, the most recent of which is Solace, 2018, which Brendan Constantine called Astonishing, ... All the territories of the heart are explored here, end of quote. He lives in Hollywood with poet-artist Celeste Goyer, and his daughter is the New York-based poet Iris Cushing. There's strength and generosity in Cushing's poetry, a modern surrealism that's new, inventive, humorous, elegiac, and uplifting. A magnificent poet. Here's James Cushing.
Thank you so much, Harry. Can everyone see and hear me? Okay, good. Harry, thank you so much for inviting me to this.
Thank you.
And Jim, thank you so much for sharing your honest and multi-layered and remarkable work.
Thank you.
I had the pleasure of reading a few of your poems online earlier this week when I knew that we were going to be doing this. and I was I think I mentioned this to you in an email. I was really struck by what you do with the prose poem, and I was also struck with what you do with what I was calling the mother figure. You know, that is well, I think as people in the arts, we all know that words like mother and father and sister and brother are actually more complex than they first appear. And for example, when we use the word mother, we're almost always talking about two very different entities. One of them a particular human being who had a personal history and fingerprints and a social security number and a certain clothes and a certain personal aroma and a certain way of sitting in a chair and a 100,000 other unique attributes. And then at the same time, we're also talking about an archetypal figure who has lived, as long as human beings have been trying to create art, and will probably live, as long as any human beings attempt. So every time one writes about the mother, one is writing about an emotionally rich collision of the absolute and the contingent. So this is one of the reasons that I find this subject fascinating, and a fascinating subject for poetry, which has to do with creating new kinds of order out of old kinds of chaos. So the poems that I'm going to read tonight come from a couple of my Columbia Press collections, both of which are still in print and both of which are available in case anyone would like. And if anyone would like to order them, at the MPTF, you can certainly ask Harry. This one is called Undercurrent Blues, which came out in 2005, and then this one here is called Solace, and this is from, as I say, from 2018. From Undercurrent Blues, I'm going to read a poem about the parent-child situation, and I wrote this in one of my favorite literary forms, the pantoum. I think I'm speaking to an audience in which I do not need to explain what a pantoum is. I tried to do it as strictly as possible because I find that the more strictly you do it, the more surprising it is. Organists Wanted is the name of this poem. It happens multiple times throughout the play. The mother bores, the father scolds, the only child sits in the kitchen playing his favorite records in his head. The mother bores the father, scolds him and the boy together this time. Playing his favorite records in his head, he finds a plausible way of escaping from him. And the boy, together this time, farther from his parents than ever before, finds a plausible way from escaping from that kitchen chair, those angry white appliances. Farther from his parents than ever before, he grows far from us as well. That kitchen chair, those angry white appliances, Kenmore oven, hot point refrigerator, wearing blender, won't say how he grows. Far from us as well, yet less than 90 seconds from now, the Kenmore oven, hot point refrigerator, and wearing blender won't say how they expect us to take him home. And yet, less than 90 seconds from now, the big white doors of the kitchen swoosh inward. They expect us to take him home, to build a special bedroom for him and tuck him in. Big white doors of the kitchen swoosh inward. Mother returns with a fresh bourbon and water to build. A special bedroom for him and tuck him in, she wants to say, but her anger prevents her. Silently, Mother returns with a fresh bourbon and water, makes another one for her husband, just back from Philadelphia. She wants to say, but her anger prevents her. Silently, I watched the clock, word by ticking word. I am a woman who makes another one for her husband, just back from Philadelphia, full of stories about vivid people drinking and talking. I watch the clock, word by ticking word. I am a woman. Who is her husband? The boy's father in the next room, full of stories about vivid people drinking and talking. This man has taken lives and saved them. Tonight, he knows he is her husband, the boy's father. In the next room, his son, his burden, starts singing where he must come to live. This man has taken lives and saved them tonight. He knows. He knows his wife, knows how to handle his burden and his boy, his son. His burden starts seeing where he must come to live. Of course, he must come with us. We who pace and mingle in the lobby know his wife, know how to handle his burden. And his boy, his only child, sits in the kitchen. Of course, he must come with us, we who pace and mingle in the lobby. It happens multiple times throughout the play. It's called Organist Wanted from Undercurrent Blues, a pantoum. Let me continue with another mother poem from Solace, and then I'll read a prose poem since my new friend and colleague Jim Moore shared some of his prose poems with us. This is not in any particular pre-existing literary form. This is called Guilty Knowledge. Clown, give me your red rubber nose that I may squeeze it. This is not a child's dilemma. Strange footsteps thump and we feel more alive than we do in winter. Little electric lights fall onto our piñata. I remember what I wanted to ask my mother before she rode off on a sticky bronze horse. I never heard her words, but guessed the size of her happiness, her power to confuse. From the back, she's an evergreen who sees the lilies wilt. Sunflowers drop their seeds and droop. Rocks the size of horses disappear in a single night. From the front, she's stalking the weekend. Her coins darken in her palm. I have one eye for what I'm following, another for the path it takes. No one but me sees their glowing tracks. In the shadow of a slice of birthday cake, prose poem from the book Solace. Don't be jealous. It's cold, milky coffee. It's not some elixir. In the shadow of a slice of birthday cake. Yes, say the elders. It is good to have an older brother, one whose wing you feel cool and strong beneath. For an older brother is an image of the future. Oh, it is good to hear the call of the past, to heed that voice. It is good to re-cry tears we shed when our losses were fresh, and to re-laugh at what once made us lighthearted. Yet it is also good to see an image of one's possible destiny, and so it is good to have an older brother or one who serves that duty. I was 15 years old, full of how wind falls onto trees and sets loose pods and pebbles of memory, scented with eucalyptus dust, or dusted with eucalyptus scent, whichever it is. Nothing yet had been heard from the night. I wasn't implicated in any of it. I simply ate my macaroni and read Ramparts. No one hurried to save me from anything that went bump or yank the money chain. She felt ambivalent. Ceilings seemed lower, and while the idea of many small rooms wasn't fundamentally objectionable, these rooms were like storage boxes with connecting aisles, and you were supposed to live and sleep in these boxes, getting from one to another through a system of stairs and catwalks. This is going to take some getting used to, she said to herself as she lay down next to the coffee maker. But another scary dream shook her awake at 4:15 a.m., and her hands trembled as she lit a cigarette and heated milk in a pan. I remember standing in a dingy wind, looking at the city hall, full of men in black leather and women in red lipstick and tight short dresses, then walking to the lip of the freeway and sticking out my thumb. Night opened its hermaphroditic thighs, which no one can look upon for long. That's why it grows dark. And somewhere a bard began his heroic song. I heard the bard's voice as though it came from my own interior. And suddenly, raw material of all kinds started pouring out of every socket, speaker, screen, page, and mouth. On stage, actors sucked sugarless, fruit-flavored hard candy and played out their characters' sour, Rube Goldberg-ish lives. The set design recalled William Steinberg's Fineness of Lime and offered cryptic explanations of what was supposed to make the cat push the tennis ball onto the bird nest, etc., written in an epigrammatic, syntactically puzzling style, too close and too far off to be readable, too important and too trivial to comment upon. The scene began with wagging fingers and gnomes, fairies, elves, and all of that group hopping in zany motion through green pastures, sheep shit, all that. Then a tragic hand dropped coffee onto the backs of the assembled like thunderstorm, and a humid electric cling fueled up the air like reggae. I didn't get it at first. An overweight man wearing only a red G-string explained my non-comprehension to me as a consequence of insufficient cream in my diet. "You must drink more cream," he said, through his red and gray Van Dyke beard. I suddenly felt able to fly. I looked at the face of my old-fashioned watch. The crystal shaped itself into a lens. I looked through the lens and saw the same man stride confidently across the stage to a piano, sit and begin a Duke Ellington medley. Some stared at his G-string, some at his beard. Others simply dismantled their salads. I stretched my legs, my neck, even my fingers, but still heard, even above the piano music, the crackling sound of spring landing on the roof with heavy, booted feet. She remembered lying in bed at night alone, half awake, the day's events turning in her mind, fire tales from falling stars visible enough to wish on. The creamy sound of trumpets and trombones guarded the images at the center of her wishes, inchoate though they may have been. Some part of them may have come true. Now she wonders, was she misleading herself all along? Everyone she knows smells of dark roasted coffee and lemon cake every time. The predictability's wearing her out. If only someone she knew smelled really, really bad. Yes, say the elders, it is good for the young to act foolishly, that they may demonstrate the truth of the proverb and thereby earn the right to learn its wisdom. It is good that kinetic moments be preserved in all their explosive immediacy. so that we may come to love their power to frighten and liberate, thrill and heal. It is good to look into a tiger's eye, to fill a truck with your belongings, drive it to a place you've never been, and build a new life there. How much of the world's great story moves in just this way, through the foolish beauty of the heart?
The harness of the hearts.
Of the heart. That's in the shadow of a slice of birthday cake from Solace, a prose poem. Speaking of prose poems, the book Undercurrent Blues, from which that pantoum that I began with comes, has a section of earlier work that was set into motion by some of the great songs in the American Songbook, the ones that were done by, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, and I thought I would continue with some of these poems, which I haven't looked at in a while, and which I suddenly felt closer to than I felt in some years. From Undercurrent Blues, here are I think I'll have time for 3 of these. This is called Yesterdays, and if you know the song Yesterdays, for today I'm dreaming of that one. Yesterdays. One morning in 1990, I noticed 3 tuna boats rolling down my sloping street past giant broccoli. They were not a dream. The police cruisers following them were no dream either. Call them whatever, sprites, imps, elves, trolls, forms of loss and buried rage. Their scorn injured late autumn flowers, one of which was your face, as you sat reading The House of the Spirits while wearing 2 shades of blue, head reclining on a purple pillow, while Mediterranean light guarding the bottom of the frame, fog buffering the whole image, an emblem of American life late in the 20th century. Silly, isn't it? Yet November arises again. Lovers next door exhaust themselves with orgasms, wake up deaf and thirsty. The mouth of the fruit bowl cries out to the ears, eyes, and tongues concealed around the room. We move them from their corners to the center, telling each other we were making something beautiful, musical, strange. And now that 10 p.m. has returned from her journey through her unforgiving past, we can pause, reflect, telephone the question man, come a little closer to the flame. Blues in the night. Amelia. Her name is Amelia. She lives on a small street 3 blocks west of here. 2 nights ago, I met her here, and now no one seems to have heard of her or seen her. And what's worse, when I see her running naked toward me, I realize I'm naked too, and a sudden audience starts to laugh, to roar, to hurl bleeding chickens and pig slops at me and my Amelia. It's horrible, this abuse. Can't anyone stop it? Can't I sneak backstage with my Amelia and find our clothes, escape into the warm New York summer evening, hide in some anonymous cafeteria where shabby men play chess in front of a black and white TV? The stage we leave doesn't leave us, Amelia. It collapses like a jerry-built cabin. Can you see it down there in the canyon, Amelia, lying in pieces? Have you any idea how much each of those pieces weighs? How long and steep the slope we'll have to climb? The size of the centipedes down there? Amelia, did you consult the man in the funny hat and shoes before you consented to this? Did he tell you what you needed to know? Are you strong, my love? Or are you having second thoughts? This is called taking a chance on love. Everybody needs 3 wishes this summer, even the squirrels and no-see-ums, and the air feels heavy with their needing. No threat, a tiny radio makes comic suggestions, but soft pedals the nation's darker moments, concentrating 15 years of need like lemonade into one stinging, sticky sweet condition. Yes, this is the way we are now, forever. I remember 2 figures, neither with a name I ever knew, moving over the highway bridge toward your cul-de-sac. It was clear to me they were made of steel, but that was no reason to disregard their history, colorful, unusually tragic. Destination, those who say don't know, or depth of ability to give accurate descriptions of stamens and pistils. They grow thinner during the night. Or was I only holding their image differently in the sense of approaching it with unconscious expectations, like a new father approaching his infant child? Stamen plus pistil form half of a thin, distant equation on the verge of evaporating into a mere concept, which is where I had to stop and face you in your secrecy, the physical fact of you, living or dying in a private place where impatience is a constant, like sex. You faced me back, and we spoke. We left the gallery shortly after that, our chins stretched like new self-portraits, changed into sparrows in afternoon sunlight. You admitted later you were grateful for that moment of terror, one highlighted section of unambiguous feeling, like a hatchling, filthy and rat-like, breaking its shell and squawking right up in your astonished face. We were falling through time at science fiction speeds, hissing in waters off Bermuda. Our rescuers brought up a blackened metal capsule, incomprehensibly gnarled, which made sense in the way only fairy tales do, waiting up there to be read on the shelf. Let me close with one last poem, again from Undercurrent Blues. This is called This Nearly Was Mine. I travel back to age 15, but previewing August like a boy in a garden cannot scrape away frustration. I tear up paper roses in a fit but cannot free them. So I leave the Shakespeare open on a table, climb upstairs to a black and yellow novel, whiter and cooler than sleep. I sweated so last night, my dreams stopped abruptly at my drowning. Still dark, the wooden sky filled the cellar deep with water, but this morning sees no wind, no chance of rain. Today's so hot, an open window means no lamps will light. Now I'm in a yard so small, when I say my name, I turn 36. And a dandelion gone white-haired sighs its way out of the world, regretting that the heat must end its little story. Ear forced to the ground, his hands stained green, the garden boy turns to his father and waits.
That was fabulous, Jim.
Thank you so much, Harry, for inviting me. Thank you, MPTF, for hosting this. Thank you, Coenga Press for making these books possible. Both of them are still in print. Both of them are available. And may the spirits of all the great poets of America and Los Angeles be with us now and for the rest of our lives.
Jim,
Thank you, Jim. That was just lovely.
I just want to say you have such deep range, such depth of feeling. Plus, not only personal but imaginative. And they're some of the poems you wrote in the past, but they just seem so immediate.
Thank you.
We have 2 minutes left. So could you please answer the same type of question? You know, how did you get into poetry? What is it about poetry that attracted you to poetry? If you come back, Jim.
No, I'm in an unusual position to answer that question.
Dylan Thomas.
This the LP version of this compact disc. This is exactly and precisely what got me interested in poetry.
How old were you?
I was 12 and in the 7th grade. This was in December of 1965, and in my English class this was in Connecticut. In my English class on the day before before Christmas vacation, it was a Friday. I think it was the 17th or the 18th, right near the solstice. My English teacher, Mrs. Isabel Teal, brought in this LP and an old-fashioned Schroeder record player. And she put on side 1, which has the short story "A Child's Christmas in Wales," read by Dylan Thomas. And instead of taking the record off at the end of the story, she let it play for the rest of the side, which contained the poem "Fern Hill." And hearing Dylan Thomas read "Fern Hill," now as I was young and easy, hearing that set some things into motion in me that was the most exciting thing I'd done. It was the most exciting thing I'd heard since the Beatles, it was the most exciting thing in my sensory experience since these girls, in my classroom, who suddenly looked so good to me. And it was all so I wanted to do that. I wanted to join that because it was attractive and I recognized it. It was new and familiar at the same time.
And you have done exactly that. And it's 2:00. So once again, thank you, Jim Moore. Thank you, James Cushing. Thank you, Phoebe, Celeste, and Deborah, for your being wonderful observers. And back to the fabulous Jennifer Clymer. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you guys so much. And I look forward to the next time around when you come back and regale us with more beautiful words.